Russian President Vladimir Putin is claiming victory in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. But Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said today that the U.S. believes Mariupol is contested. Kirby reportedly told CNN that the U.S. assessment is still that the city hasn't been taken by the Russians and that there's still active Ukrainian resistance. Joining me now to give his assessment on the current situation and not only what's happening in Ukraine, but really on the international stage is former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you, Tony. Thanks for having me back on today.
Well, it's always good to see you, and I can only imagine what is going through your mind as you're looking at these events unfolding, and you cannot help but be drawn into this because of the role that you played as not only Secretary of State, but prior to that as the head of the CIA. Is the administration being aggressive enough in our response to what we now know is unfolding before us?
Well, Tony, these images that we've all now seen are horrific. What Vladimir Putin has done is among the greatest war crimes we have seen in most of our adult lives. That is for sure. It's why we worked so hard for 4 years, and I worked so hard as America's Secretary of State to help the Ukrainians be ready. I remember being down in the region, in the Donbass region, when I was CIA director. Our CIA teams were training Ukrainian special operators in the region for exactly this day. We didn't know when it was happening, and we worked to make sure that it wouldn't happen, to deter Vladimir Putin from precisely this. I've watched the Biden administration, and while all of the blame rests with Vladimir Putin, we could have done so much more. We could have provided weapon systems earlier. Think of September and October of last year when everybody knew that Putin was preparing for this invasion. We could have provided the right systems, the systems the Ukrainians had asked for. They haven't asked for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. They've simply asked us to provide them with the tools to protect their own sovereignty, and intelligence sharing is vitally important to the Ukrainians. I've watched the administration get better over these last weeks. I applaud them for that. But more, faster, and the right systems will be an absolute imperative to protect the Ukrainian people to the maximum extent possible and reduce the further horrors that Vladimir Putin intends to inflict.
You know, after incidents like this, of course, we go back to World War II, the Nazis, and we hear the phrase "never again." But here we find ourselves once again. In fact, we saw it in the Obama administration with the Yazidis. And we see this genocide that's taking place. Of course, the Trump administration, under your leadership as Secretary of State, declared what was happening in China as genocide with the Uyghurs. But there's something we can do, and I'm not advocating that we send troops in, and as you said, President Zelensky is not asking for that. But a strong America leads to a safer world, does it not?
No, Tony, every time. And I think the American people can now plainly see that what happens in places like Kyiv or Beijing doesn't stay in those places, right? From Beijing, we get the Wuhan virus, and from Kyiv and Vladimir Putin, we now get America going to pay more for food and more supply chain disruption and a real risk to instability more broadly in the West and Europe as well. No, a strong America matters. These countries all are counting on us to get it right. It's why we work so hard on religious freedom issues, because those nations with more religious freedom are stronger. It's why we were demanding that NATO be prepared to spend more of its money, NATO nations, to spend more of their money to defend themselves, and why we were working so hard to produce American energy for export to these places so they wouldn't be under the thumb of Vladimir Putin and his coercive use of energy in places like Germany and France and Ukraine. You know, the French and Germans are still underwriting Russia, even as we sit here today. So yes, the United States needs to lead. We could do more. We can open up the American economy in ways that would importantly provide real support for the Ukrainians and the tools they need to defend themselves.
Mr. Secretary, I want to shift gears just a little bit because I don't want to be myopic and focusing just on Ukraine, as significant as that is, but I think we have to be wide-eyed, looking in our peripheral vision as to what else is happening internationally and who is taking their cues from how we are responding, whether we're responding in the right way. What are those other threats out there that we need to be looking at right now?
Tony, we've seen just in the last few weeks, there hasn't been much reporting because Ukraine's been so front and center. Just in the last few weeks, the North Koreans have begun to launch longer and more frequent missiles, something that they didn't do for our last 3 years. of the Trump administration. Chairman Kim's watching American weakness. I can assure you that Xi Jinping is watching this too. The Chinese Communist Party knows that there's a potential window where they can take actions that might not get a strong, resolved response from the United States of America. Those are our adversaries. Our friends are watching too. They're questioning whether the United States will do the things it promised it would do. You'll recall we'd made a commitment back in the early 90s to Ukraine to support them if they gave up their nuclear weapons. I wonder if every other country in the world is not wondering whether America, under the leadership of President Biden, is prepared to walk away from the most important commitments they have made to defend themselves, ourselves here at home, and to defend and support our friends and partners around the world. Think of Japan and Australia and the Saudis and the Emiratis, good security partners. And then perhaps most centrally, think of Israel, that's watching us sit at the table with the Iranians, giving them billions of dollars in some new deal. I promise you, the Israelis are wondering if America will actually stand up for our values and our Judeo-Christian tradition as well.
Mr. Secretary, in the last few years, obviously, we've been talking about foreign policy issues, religious freedom internationally, because that's where you've been. You've been at the tip of the spear. But, of course, we've known each other a lot longer. Your time in Congress, you had a full portfolio, not just the foreign policy issues, but the domestic issues. And we've seen a lot happen, especially just in the last 14 months under this administration, where we've seen a more aggressive corporate America advancing the left's social agenda, but still, looking to Republicans for favorable tax policy. But it looks like we might be coming to that point where Republicans are splitting with corporate America and carrying their water. What do you make of what we see happening in Florida with Disney, what we see happening, last year we saw with Coca-Cola in Georgia, Delta? What do you make of that?
These private businesses ought to mind to their own business, get out of picking up the agenda for the woke left because a handful of employees signed petitions or letters or threatened to walk out. They should tell them, if you want to walk out for that, knock yourself out, walk on out. They should do the things that they're supposed to do to create prosperity and wealth. That's the mission set. And when they don't, those of us who have conservative beliefs should demand that they begin to change their ways. I'm thrilled by what we're seeing happen all across America. I think you could see that this corporate leftist ideology, it's not just the things we're seeing in Florida, but think of the ESG rules that are imposing enormous costs on ordinary families all across America under the guise of climate change. You have big corporate companies, our biggest banks in America, now putting these rules in place that are going to destroy families and destroy lives and drive up costs. We can do better than America, and Republicans should demand that we hold accountable those corporate leaders that are taking America in the direction that's just simply inconsistent with who we are as conservatives and as Republicans.
Could not agree more. In fact, I think this day has been long in coming, and I'm grateful for one to see it. And I hope there may be a corporate course correction as a result of even stockholders weighing in. Mike Pompeo, always great to see you, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tony, great to be with you, sir. Have a good day.